You are 16 years old. Your mother just poisoned a man to put a crown on your head. You didn't ask for this throne, but now it's yours. And in 14 years, you will burn the greatest city on earth and blame someone else for it. To understand how a boy becomes this, you have to go back further, to a family where poison wasn't a scandal. It was practically a tradition. Nero was born into the Julio-Claudian dynasty, a family tree soaked in ambition and blood before he ever drew his first breath. His mother, Agrippina the Younger, was the great-granddaughter of Augustus himself, and she carried that bloodline like a weapon. She had already survived exile, watched relatives murdered or forced into suicide, and learned the one lesson that mattered in Rome's imperial court. Power is never given. It's taken, usually over someone else's dead body. When Agrippina married her own uncle, the Emperor Claudius, it wasn't love, it was strategy. She convinced him to adopt her son over his own biological child, a boy named Britannicus, who had a stronger claim to the throne. Slowly, patiently, she surrounded Claudius with people loyal only to her. And when the moment was right, historians say she served him a dish of poisoned mushrooms. Claudius died. Nero, at just 16 years old, was declared emperor of Rome. He hadn't campaigned for it. He hadn't earned it. He'd simply been the tool his mother used to open the door to the throne room, and now he was the one sitting on it. For the first 5 years, something strange happened. Nero was actually good at this. Guided by his tutor, the philosopher Seneca, and the level-headed guard commander Burrus, the teenage emperor lowered taxes, banned the harshest forms of capital punishment in the arena, and even allowed slaves to bring legal complaints against cruel masters. He funded public games, supported the arts, and postured himself as a friend of the common people. Historians would later call this period the Quinquennium Neronis, the 5 good years of Nero. For a while, Rome believed it had inherited a philosopher king, but underneath the surface, a war was already brewing, because Agrippina had not given him a throne to rule. She'd given him a throne to control. She expected to rule through him, to sit beside him during meetings with foreign dignitaries, to have the final word on decisions of state. And Nero, for all his youth, wanted something his mother never planned for, to actually be emperor, not just wear the crown while she held the strings. The first crack came through his own home. Nero fell for a woman named Poppaea Sabina, ambitious and clever in her own right, and Agrippina despised her, seeing correctly that Poppaea was teaching her son to think for himself. Then came Britannicus, Claudius's actual son, the boy whose birthright Nero had quietly stolen. As Britannicus approached the age where he could legally challenge for the throne, he died suddenly at a banquet, reportedly after drinking from a cup of poisoned water. Rome barely blinked. By now, poison at the dinner table was simply how the family settled its disagreements. Agrippina's warnings became threats. She reminded Nero, loudly and often, that she was the reason he wore the crown at all, and that she could just as easily help someone else wear it instead. For Nero, that wasn't nagging. That was a declaration of war from the one person who knew exactly how the game was played, because she'd invented half the rules herself. So Nero decided to remove her, the same way she had removed everyone standing between her and power. The first attempt was almost theatrical. A self-collapsing boat, built specifically to sink beneath her during a nighttime voyage on the Bay of Naples. The ceiling was rigged to fall. The hull was built to break apart in the water. It worked exactly as planned. The boat sank, except Agrippina, ever resourceful, simply swam to shore. When word reached Nero that his mother had survived the accident, historians say he panicked, and then he stopped hesitating. He sent soldiers to her villa that same night. They didn't bother with poison this time. They finished it with a blade. To the Senate, the official story was simple. Agrippina had been plotting against the emperor's life, and the guards had acted to protect Rome. Seneca personally wrote the letter justifying it, and the Senate accepted the explanation without meaningful protest. That silence taught Nero something far more dangerous than power itself, that he could do absolutely anything, and Rome would find a way to look past it. For years after, that lesson metastasized. Advisors who challenged him found themselves exiled or forced into suicide, including eventually Seneca himself and Burrus, the two men who had once kept his worst instincts in check. Without them, there was no one left in the room willing to say no to the Emperor of Rome. Then, in the summer of 64 AD, Rome caught fire. It started in the shops surrounding the Circus Maximus, spreading through streets packed with wooden tenements stacked 3 and 4 stories high. For 6 days and 7 nights, the fire tore through the city almost unchecked, consuming entire districts, leaving only a handful of Rome's 14 regions untouched. Rumors spread instantly and viciously that the emperor had watched the destruction from a tower, composing music about the burning of Troy while his own capital turned to ash. The truth, as far as historians can piece together, was different. Nero wasn't even in Rome when the fire broke out. He was 35 miles away at his villa in Antium. When word reached him, he rushed back, opened his own private gardens to shelter the homeless, and organized emergency grain shipments to prevent starvation in the ruined city. He personally funded new building codes requiring wider streets and fire-resistant materials, changes that arguably made Rome safer for generations afterward. But none of that mattered, because Rome needed someone to blame, and an emperor who built himself an enormous new palace on the ashes of the burned city looked exactly like a man who had wanted the fire to happen. That palace, the Domus Aurea, the Golden House, sprawled across acres of prime real estate that had conveniently just been cleared by flame, complete with gilded ceilings, an artificial lake, and a 100-foot bronze statue of Nero himself at the entrance. To silence the rumors circling his own name, Nero pointed the blame elsewhere, at a small, unpopular religious minority in the city, the Christians. They were rounded up, and a brutal persecution began, some executed in the arena, others reportedly used as human torches to light Nero's gardens at night. It was cruelty designed for one purpose: to give an angry city somewhere else to aim its rage. It worked for a while, but the deeper damage to Nero's reputation could not be undone. In the years that followed, his rule unraveled piece by piece. The treasury, drained by the Golden House and Nero's increasingly extravagant tastes, forced him to raise taxes and even debase Rome's currency. Provincial governors, watching an emperor who seemed more interested in performing as a singer and actor than governing an empire, began to rebel openly. In Gaul, the governor Vindex rose up. In Spain, the general Galba declared himself emperor and marched toward Rome. The Senate, sensing the tide had turned, declared Nero a public enemy of the state, stripped of his title, sentenced in absentia to be flogged to death. His own Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers whose entire purpose was protecting the emperor, simply abandoned their posts. The man who once had armies and senators alike terrified to disagree with him now couldn't find a single soldier willing to stand between him and the mob. Nero fled Rome with a handful of loyal servants to a villa just outside the city, hiding as soldiers closed in to arrest him. Even at the very end, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he had built and destroyed, he couldn't bring himself to finish it alone. With the help of his secretary, he drove a blade into his own throat. He was 30 years old. His final words, according to the historian Suetonius, were, "What an artist dies in me." It's a strange, almost fitting epitaph for a man who spent his entire life more terrified of being forgotten than of being feared. He wanted to be remembered as a performer, a poet, an artist beloved by the people, and instead, he became the emperor history remembers as the one who fiddled while Rome burned, a legend that isn't even historically accurate, but has outlived every real thing he actually did. Because that's the final, brutal irony of Nero's story. Power didn't turn him into a monster. It simply removed, one by one, every single person who might have stopped him from becoming one. His mother's rivals, his own mother, his tutors, his generals, and finally, himself. If you want more stories of the kings and emperors history couldn't forgive, subscribe. There's always another throne, and always, eventually, another fall.